Hi guys, welcome back to G Chats with your host G. We are back in the G spot and I'm super excited for today's episode because we are talking about something that's super important, and that is birth control. And I decided to do an entire episode about birth control because one of the biggest things that I've recognized being in this space is that so many people are on birth control and they just don't know how birth control works. So that's honestly the main driver of this episode, because we're not just going to be talking about what kind of birth control exists and where you can get them and things like that. We're going to be talking about how it actually works, what it does to your hormones, and why, the biggest thing, why understanding your body matters, because there's so much power in understanding our bodies, and that's just not discussed enough, because so many of us were handed a pack of pills at 15, or even just like told about this pack of pills at age 15. And really how it's phrased to us as young girls is, take this, it'll fix your period. Because if we're having very heavy periods, or if we're 15 years old and we were having abnormal periods, we were told this would fix our period. We were also told like, oh, this just prevents pregnancy. But what does that mean? What does preventing pregnancy or fixing your period or making your period lighter and less painful, what does all of that mean? Those are just words. What's actually happening on an anatomical, scientific level? That is why I'm here today, to give you that information. That way, this can allow for those of you listening to feel more informed, whether you're on birth control or you're not, or you're thinking of going on it, you're thinking of getting off of it. This episode is to make you feel informed and more in control of your choice. And I want to emphasize, I think by now most of you probably know, this is not about shaming anyone's decision whether they want to be on birth control or not. This is about me, a scientist, giving you the information and then you making the decision that's best for you. I am in support of whatever decision any of you make, so long as you feel you have the information to make an informed decision. That's what's important to me. I don't care what your choice is. I just want it to be an informed one. So that is why I'm here today, to give you information so that you can make an informed choice of whether you want to be on it, you don't want to be on it, or if you're just here to learn, like you're not even thinking of birth control, you're just like, let me learn. Let's get into this episode and let's talk about birth control. So we cannot start talking about birth control if we don't start the episode with the natural cycle and what happens without birth control, because birth control essentially affects a natural, normal cycle. That's what it does. It's affecting your menstrual cycle. And so I cannot dive into what it's doing without telling you what the cycle is. So the menstrual cycle is a hormonal symphony, and basically our hormones go up and down every single month. Like that's just the way our hormones work. And a typical menstrual cycle is around 28 days, although it can be anywhere from like 24 to 34 for some people, but on average, people's menstrual cycle is about 28 days, and this is what's considered typically normal. And the cycle is divided into 4 very key phases. So the first phase is your menstrual phase, menstruation, and this happens on day 1. So when you start bleeding and you're having your period, this is what's called menstruation, and this is the start of your menstrual cycle. So what's happening is estrogen and progesterone dropped literally right before your period. And this is because the body recognized that there was no fertilized egg, there was no pregnancy. So this crash, this dip of estrogen and progesterone is what triggers the uterine lining to shed. And that is what is your period. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the uterine lining and shedding, because essentially it's hard when we're talking about menstrual cycles, because sometimes, like when I talk about it, I'm like, menstruation kind of sounds like the end, like you're getting rid of it, but it's technically the start of your cycle. But it feels like it's the end because you are basically getting rid of everything and but you are starting over essentially. So it's a little mixy, but that's basically what's happening. And we'll talk about the uterine lining and everything. But you are basically shedding the uterine lining, and this will come full circle when we get to the luteal phase. So let's continue. Next, we have the follicular phase. Now, what's important to remember is while you are menstruating, so while you're on your period and while you are bleeding, you are already starting your follicular phase. And the follicular phase is the drop in the hormones. So when your estrogen and progesterone plummet, and it triggers the uterine lining to shed, and that's your period and you're bleeding. This drop of these two hormones triggers the hypothalamus in your brain to release FSH, which is the follicle stimulating hormone. And FSH signals to the ovaries to start maturing multiple follicles. So you have little follicles on your egg. So multiple follicles start to mature. And what happens is each follicle contains an immature egg. So you guys all heard of that saying where, oh, we're born with all of the eggs that we will ever have. Yes. So all of those follicles that are maturing, they all have immature eggs in them. And so FSH, that signal to start stimulating FSH, it's called follicle stimulating hormone for a reason. It's stimulating the follicles to start maturing, and there's immature eggs in each of them. But during this time in your follicular phase, there's only one follicle that's the dominant one, the strong one. So it's very similar. We always say, like, when men have semen and sperm, there's multiple sperm cells that are swimming, but there's just one sperm that makes it the winner. That's the same concept with the ovaries and the follicles. There's multiple follicles, but there's just one follicle that dominates and is the one that's the winner. And this one dominant follicle will be the survivor, and the rest basically just die off. And the dominant follicle starts to produce estrogen. So your follicular phase happens between day 1, when you're starting your period, up until day 14, which is around ovulation. So this dominant follicle triggers the production of estrogen. So this is why we start to see our estrogen climbs again while we're bleeding. Your estrogen starts to climb, and that's because this follicle that's maturing stimulates estrogen now to pick up. And it does this because it wants estrogen to thicken the uterine lining and prepare the body for ovulation. So the reason you want a thick uterine lining when you are preparing for pregnancy and fertilization is because the uterine lining thickening is tissue, blood, and all of this tissue and blood, what it has is nutrients. It has stem cells. It's very nutrient dense. And that is because a fertilized egg is meant to implant into the uterine lining. And when it implants into the uterine lining that has this blood, the tissue, it is literally feeding and nurturing the fertilized egg. So that is why the uterine lining thickens, because your body's preparing to basically feed a fertilized egg. So leading up to that is ovulation, and ovulation is usually around day 14. So when estrogen peaks, so your estrogen starts to climb, and then on ovulation day, it peaks. And it triggers, once the estrogen peaks and gets to its highest, it triggers a surge in your luteinizing hormone, also known as LH. Now, luteinizing hormone is super, super important because your luteinizing hormone is what allows that follicle, that one egg, that one dominant follicle that's been maturing, it basically shoots it out. It shoots the egg out of the follicle and it essentially bursts. That's what it does. So that LH hormone, the luteinizing hormone, causes the dominant follicle to release the egg into the fallopian tube, into our tube. And this is known as ovulation. It is the release of a matured egg. That's ovulation. And so the egg survives in the fallopian tube for only 12 to 24 hours. But we're going to talk about the fertile window. Sperm can live in the body for up to 6 days, some cases 7 days. So sperm can live in the body in the woman's vagina for up to 7 days. However, the only time that sperm can get you pregnant is when you are ovulating, when the egg is in your fallopian tube. That's the only time that the sperm can fertilize an egg. It can't fertilize the egg when the egg is still in your ovary. It can't fertilize the egg when the egg is in your uterus. The only chance that you have at getting pregnant is that 12 to 24 hour time span that the egg is sitting in the fallopian tube and literally saying, come here, I'm ready. I'm ready to get pregnant. That's exactly what ovulation is. It is your egg and your body ready for sperm to fertilize it. So I will talk a little bit about the fertile window, but that's just really important to know that window, that ovulation window, it's different than the fertile window. Ovulation, that 12 to 24 hour time span, is when the egg has the gates open and is accepting sperm. So then what happens is your luteal phase. So right after ovulation, your luteal phase begins. So this is when the follicle that had the dominant egg and the mature egg, it becomes the corpus luteum, and the corpus luteum is what secretes progesterone, and progesterone is what maintains the uterine lining in case a fertilized egg implants. So right after you ovulate, the body doesn't know if you're pregnant yet. And actually, as the egg travels, we're going to talk about this, but as the egg now travels to the uterus, the body is thinking that you're pregnant. That's the body the whole time is anticipating you getting pregnant. So that is why the follicle turns into the corpus luteum and starts secreting progesterone, because it wants to keep that uterine lining, because it's anticipating that an egg is fertilized, and that this fertilized egg, the zygote, is going to implant into the uterus. So that's why the corpus luteum is happening, and that's where the luteal phase comes from. So the luteal phase will be from day 15 all the way up until day 28, the day right before your period. So what happens is, if fertilization does occur, so if you are pregnant, the sperm will meet the egg in the fallopian tube. As I said, that's where it gets fertilized, in the fallopian tube. And it'll get fertilized and turn into a zygote. And the zygote will travel through the fallopian tube and to the uterus, and it will implant in the uterus about 5 to 6 days later. And this is why it's super important to understand why pregnancy tests even work. Like, people take pregnancy tests all the time and don't even know what a pregnancy test is looking for. And what it's looking for is HCG, which is the pregnancy hormone, because once that egg implants into the uterus, into the uterine lining, that implantation is what triggers HCG, the pregnancy hormone. And that's what you can find very early on, because the second that it implants, it triggers HCG. Even if it's minimal, pregnancy tests now are so good at picking up HCG hormone secretion. So HCG is what keeps the corpus luteum alive, and it keeps producing progesterone and supports pregnancy. So that's why so remember, ovulation happens on day 14, and then you have a 12 to 24-hour window of the egg waiting to get fertilized. So that takes you into day 15, and then it starts traveling. So if your egg gets fertilized, it usually won't implant until like day 21 of your cycle. Day 21, day 22. In the early 20s of your cycle is where you can expect implantation. So that is why now pregnancy tests can literally detect. They've gotten so good. So if you test too early, like let's say you had unprotected sex and the egg did get fertilized on and day 18, day 19, it's like traveling and now it's in the uterus. If it doesn't implant, you're not secreting HCG. So the pregnancy test won't show up positive. You want to wait for it to implant, and that's where you will get a positive pregnancy test. Sometimes it's hard to detect because it's secreting in very minimal amounts, especially in the beginning, but pregnancy tests now are like super good, and they'll be able to detect even the trace amounts. But if no fertilization occurs, the corpus luteum then breaks down and progesterone dips and the uterine lining sheds and your period starts all over again and the cycle begins. It just repeats. So essentially, once the egg makes its way to the uterus, if it just sits there and it's like I have nothing to implant to because I'm not fertilized, then the corpus luteum breaks down. It recognizes this, progesterone dips, estrogen dips, everything starts to dip. And that's why leading up to day 1, the bleeding day, everything's dipping, you're irritable, yada, yada, yada. Everything dips and you start the cycle over again. So it's just really important and very empowering to know this and to understand this, because I feel like we are not taught the menstrual cycle at the full extent. I honestly, before I became a biomedical engineer, guys, like I just knew, oh, I have a period. And yeah, like on the surface, it's just my body. I didn't get pregnant, whatever. But like, I didn't fully know what was going on. So I just think it's very important and empowering just to know what's happening with our body. And it is funny to see a lot of people, they're like, oh, periods are just our body's way of punishing us for not getting pregnant. And honestly, yes, like that's true. It's just your body's response to not getting pregnant. That's what a period is. So, and I do want to talk just a little bit about the fertile window because I feel like that's very important and not enough people actually know what the fertile window is. And if you understand the fertile window and you have very regular cycles and very balanced hormones, you can actually prevent pregnancy naturally. So the fertile window is 5 days before ovulation plus your ovulation day. So why this is important is, as I mentioned, sperm can live in the vagina for 5 to 7 days. That's what we know. It can survive in the vagina for 5 to 7 days. So in the time, let's say you didn't ovulate yet, right? The egg is still maturing in the follicle, right? And it didn't burst yet. If you have unprotected sex and your partner ejaculates inside of you, this sperm from the ejaculation fluid is living inside of you. Now, once the LH surge happens and the egg bursts, the second that the egg bursts, the egg's gates open. It is waiting for sperm. So the second that it bursts, if sperm is living inside of you, it's going to swim to fertilize the egg. It's going to swim and fertilize the egg. Something's going to catch it. That's the whole point, is the LH surge is so important because once that surge happens and that egg bursts out of the ovaries and it's now in the fallopian tube, the egg is saying, come to mama, like get me pregnant. Literally, it's saying, come here. So it wants the sperm. And so if sperm is living inside of you, sperm is going to fertilize the egg. So it's important to know when your LH surge happens, which is when you ovulate. And if you have very regular periods and very balanced hormones, you can determine that pretty much every single month on a regular basis. And then you can take precaution the days leading up to your period to prevent ejaculation fluid. So you don't necessarily have to prevent sex as a whole, just prevent your partner from coming inside of you so that you don't have sperm inside of you and you can avoid sperm from swimming to the egg. Or if you are trying to get pregnant and you know when you're ovulating, you can say, hey, you don't want to just wait on the day of ovulation to have intimacy, because it's more of a, you ovulate on this day plus or minus a day. So if you have, like, let's say you're like, oh, I usually ovulate on day 17, you could ovulate on day 16 or day 18. So it's like a plus or minus. So your best shot at getting pregnant is having unprotected sex the days leading up to ovulation and not just relying on the day of ovulation, if that makes sense. So your fertile window is the days leading up to ovulation, typically about 7 days before ovulation, because sperm can survive for that long. So if you, let's say, ovulate on day 14, but you have unprotected sex and your partner ejaculates inside of you on day 7, because sperm can live up to 7 days, it is possible that on day 7, that sperm from day 7 can get you pregnant on day 14 if you ovulate on day 14. Now, if you have unprotected sex on, let's say, day 5 or day 4, you had a 4-day period. On the last day of your period, you decided to have unprotected sex. If you have sex on that day and ejaculation fluid is inside of you, sperm is inside of you, but you don't ovulate until day 15, day 16, the likelihood of you getting pregnant is slim because there's no egg to fertilize and sperm will die off by day 15. That's like a 10-day difference. So sperm doesn't live in the vagina for 12, 13, whatever days. So if you have sex on like day 4, but you don't ovulate until day 18, that's a 14-day window that there's no way that the sperm is alive by then. So it's all about knowing when you're going to ovulate and then knowing that sperm can survive. And again, they say 5 to 6 days sperm survives. I just say like 7 just to be safe when I'm talking to people. You could take, your best bet, if you are someone who wants to allow your man to come inside of you, my best advice is let him do it after you ovulate, after the egg, all right, you're in your luteal phase. And I understand a lot of women don't feel their greatest in their luteal phase. And if you're asking me, I don't think he should be having ejaculation fluid inside of you at all, unless you honestly are trying to get pregnant, because ejaculation fluid has a high pH, and this high pH can disrupt the vaginal microbiome and suffocate good bacteria. So you shouldn't be letting your partner come inside of you all the time anyways. But if you're okay with it and you want him to, my best advice is, if you don't want to get pregnant, you have really balanced hormones and a natural cycle, my best advice is to wait until after you ovulate. And after you ovulate, then you're in the green zone, because there's no egg to fertilize after ovulation. Like, the egg has long gone the fallopian tube, it's in the uterus, and you can't get pregnant anymore. There's no opportunity for pregnancy. The opportunity is when you ovulate, and whether there's sperm inside of you or not, that determines if it's going to fertilize the egg. But the opportunity is when you ovulate, ovulation day. There's literally a 12 to 24 hour time span in which you can get pregnant, which is why so many people, they don't just wait until that 12-hour window, because again, it's give or take. Like, how can you be sure it's exactly during that window? So what a lot of people do who want to get pregnant is they will have sex leading up to that day. So 3 days, 2 days, 1 day, like they're doing it leading up to the day that they're supposed to ovulate, because they don't know the ovulation window, and we know that sperm survives. So they're just hoping that a strong swimmer survives and makes it to the vagina and makes it to the eggs, and fertilizes it. So that's kind of the key here. So if you are wanting to do that, a way that you could track, and you might be thinking, like, how do I know that I ovulated? One of the ways that you could do that is through basal body temperature. So what happens is if you take your temperature every single morning at the same time, and you try to be very consistent with it, what you will notice is after you ovulate, there will be a spike in your body temperature. And by spike, I mean like a 1 degree spike. So for me, for example, I take my body temperature. I love understanding my body, and my body temperature will go from around a 97.2. That's like my average normal body temperature. The day after I ovulate, it spikes, and it spikes to a 98. I'm around like a 98.1, sometimes a 97.9, but I know when I'm in the high 97s, low 98s, that I already ovulated. So basal body temperature is one way that you could track it. Another way is through your cervical mucus. So when you ovulate, the day of ovulation, your cervical mucus will literally look like egg whites. It's going to be very thin, very runny, very watery. And it does this because you're the most fertile, and it wants to carry the sperm to the egg and get the egg fertilized. And then you also can use ovulation predictor kits, because what they're doing is testing for that LH surge. So remember, the luteinizing hormone is what bursts that egg out of the follicle and into the fallopian tube. And so what it's detecting is the climb of LH and that surge of LH. So if you want to get pregnant, knowing when your surge is at its peak will tell you today is the day of ovulation. And then you can have unprotected sex if you are trying to get pregnant, or avoid unprotected sex. So if you know your LH is climbing, stay away if you don't want to get pregnant. But if you do test and you do want to get pregnant and your LH is climbing, have unprotected sex, do the deed. So it's capable. You're very capable, and it's very possible to get pregnant naturally or avoid pregnancy naturally. And knowing this information is real and powerful, but it does rely regular cycles, hormonal balance, and consistency. So again, some people, when I explain this, they're like, oh, like, but I have PCOS. Then this isn't for you. If you are someone with hormonal imbalances, or you are someone who doesn't have regular periods, like someone's like, I have irregular periods. Yes, and this does not apply for you. So if you have regular periods, hormonal balance, and you are consistent with tracking your body temperature, checking your LH serve, tracking your ovulation, cervical mucus, you can successfully get pregnant or prevent pregnancy. So knowledge is power. I just wanted to emphasize that, because normal balanced hormones are basically preparing you for pregnancy every month. And if your hormones are balanced, it is possible to either get pregnant or not get pregnant, knowing this information. So that is your menstrual cycle. So knowing this information, we can now move on to how birth control, hormonal birth control actually works. So understanding what the normal natural cycle looks like can now give cues on what hormones are actually doing, what the hormones in our body are actually doing. So there's a number of ways that hormonal birth control works in different methods, because what they ultimately do is disrupt the natural cycle in one or more of the following ways that we're going to talk about. So we have the natural cycle, and then hormonal birth control will disrupt certain portions of this. So number one is some hormonal birth control will suppress ovulation. So what this means is it literally stops you from ovulating. So things, especially with combination methods, synthetic estrogen and progestin, that's what the combination of birth control is. They have the two hormones, estrogen and progestin. What they do is they keep the luteinizing hormone and the follicle stimulating hormone low, so there's no dominant follicle that forms, and thus there's no egg to be released. Because remember, your FSH, your follicle stimulating hormone, is what's maturing a follicle and getting you ready to release an egg, and the LH surge is what pushes out the egg. But if you never develop a follicle and you never burst out or release an egg, there's no egg. So it suppresses ovulation. It suppresses you from releasing an egg and maturing an egg. And if there's no egg, then you can't get pregnant. There's nothing to fertilize. So some options suppress ovulation. The other thing is that it thickens cervical mucus. So progestin in specific actually makes your mucus in your cervix thicker and stickier, and this makes it harder for sperm to travel. So as I mentioned, when you are ovulating, your cervical mucus becomes watery, thin, and very runny, egg white-esque. And it does this because it's trying to be as thin as possible and lubricant. And it actually holds the sperm and carries the sperm to the egg in the fallopian tube to fertilize it. So when you're on birth control, some birth control, hormonal birth control options will actually make cervical mucus thicker, and this thicker cervical mucus blocks and traps the sperm from actually traveling and swimming to the egg. And then number three is some hormonal birth controls will thin the uterine lining. So as I mentioned, your uterine lining is thickening every single month because it wants to accept a fertilized egg and allow for a fertilized egg to implant. So let's say if ovulation suppression fails, so let's say you do ovulate, well then just because you ovulate doesn't mean you're going to get pregnant, because if your cervical mucus is thick, then it'll stop the sperm from getting to the egg. But if that fails, which was option number two, the thickening of cervical mucus, if that fails and an egg does get fertilized, the other thing that hormonal birth control is doing is thinning the uterine lining, which means that it is making it less likely for the egg that just fertilized in the fallopian tubes to implant. So it basically is covering all three bases of the cycle. It's covering the base of ovulation, it's covering the base of fertilization, and it's covering the base of implantation. So hormonal birth control works by preventing one, two, or all three of the things. It can do one of them, it could do two of them, it could do all three of them. So that's how hormonal birth control actually works. It literally prevents you from either ovulating, it prevents you from actually getting fertilized by making cervical mucus thicker, or it actually prevents your fertilized egg, if you do get a fertilized egg, it prevents it from implanting because it thins the hell out of the uterine lining. And your uterine lining needs to be thick and nutrient dense in order to accept a fertilized egg and allow the fertilized egg to implant. So there's a lower chance of implantation if the uterine lining is thin. So these mechanisms are super important to understand, because that is how hormonal birth control actually works. It's altering the natural body, the natural cycle. It's altering it by stopping something or changing something, if that makes sense. It's changing the way your uterine lining is supposed to act. It's changing the way your cervical mucus is supposed to be. It's stopping your ovaries from doing what they're normally supposed to do. So that's how hormonal birth control works. So now we can talk about, knowing that, the types of hormonal birth control and how they work and what they do. So first we have combination. So combination means the combination of two hormones, estrogen and progesterone. Usually in medicine, we use progestin, which is a synthetic kind of progesterone. So estrogen and progestin combination includes the pill, COC, so the daily pill that suppresses ovulation, and it includes a placebo week for withdrawal bleeding. And yes, I said withdrawal bleeding. If you are someone who's on the pill and you have the sugar pill for a week and then you bleed and you're like, I got my period. No, you didn't. You did not get a period. You are withdrawal bleeding. I will talk about it in just a few minutes, but that is withdrawal bleeding. So that's what the pill does. There's also the patch, which is still combination hormonal birth control. This is worn weekly on the skin and it delivers steady hormone levels, and it's replaced every 7 days. And then we have the ring, which is inserted in the vagina for 3 weeks and then it's removed for 1 week. And then we have progestin only methods. Now you might be thinking, why does someone opt for progestin only? Some people who are more prone to blood clots should stay away from estrogen birth controls. So that's why they stay away from the combo. So if that's you or you just had a baby, there's certain that's why it's super important to understand your health conditions and have a provider who understands your health conditions and your medical history to know if you are a good candidate for the combination hormonal birth control or the progestin only method. So the progestin only method includes the mini pill, which is taken daily at the same time, and it may or may not suppress ovulation. But what we do know it does is that it thickens the mucus, the cervical mucus, and it thins the lining. So you can ovulate on the mini pill, but it's unlikely that you will have a fertilized egg. And if you do fertilize the egg, it's unlikely that it'll implant. So it crosses off number 2 and 3 from the list, but not number 1. Then we have the shot, the Depo-Provera shot. This is injected every 3 months and it often stops ovulation completely. And then we have the implant Nexplanon, which lasts up to 3 years and it's very effective at ovulation suppression. Again, stops you from ovulating completely. And then we have the hormonal IUD, which goes inside of the uterus and it works mostly through mucus thickening and lining thinning. So some of them will suppress ovulation, but most hormonal IUDs like Kyleena and Mirena, they will work by increasing the thickness of your cervical mucus and stopping sperm from getting to the egg if you do ovulate, and it will thin the uterine lining. And thinning the uterine lining is like the main thing since it's going in the uterus. So it makes it really difficult if an egg is fertilized to actually implant into the uterus. So I just want to mention that it's very important to understand that all of these birth control, hormonal birth control options might work for some people and might not work for other people, and side effects vary greatly. We'll talk a little bit about side effects in a bit, but it's very important to understand what they're doing. Like some people get the Nexplanon in their arm and don't even realize you are completely stopping yourself from ovulating for up to 3 years. You are literally stopping your body from maturing and releasing an egg for 3 years. And that's okay if you know that and you are informed and you make that informed decision. So that's the issue that I have with how doctors push birth control, is because I feel like it's like, oh, take this. This is easy. You don't have to worry about it. It's hassle-free. You put Nexplanon in your arm, or, oh, you get the shots, whatever. It's like they push the methods that sure are very easy and like hassle-free, which is fine, but they're not explaining to young girls who are getting the implant in their arm, they're not explaining to them that, hey, you are stopping yourself from physically ovulating for 3 years. If you tell someone that and then they're okay with it and they make that informed decision, fine. I don't care. But I just feel like you guys need to know that, because so many people don't know that. They don't know what's happening. They're just like, oh yeah, I'm forgetful of pills, so I'm going to get the implant. And whatever you decide is fine. Just make sure that whatever you're deciding, you understand how it's working, why it's working, what it's doing, all of these things, so that you can make an informed decision. So I just wanted to make sure I emphasize that. But now, speaking of deciding between the pill or deciding between Nexplanon, we need to talk about what withdrawal bleeding is versus a true period, because here's the truth. When you're on birth control, you do not actually get a real period. You don't at all on hormonal birth control. So here's the truth. You do not actually get a real period on hormonal birth control. And this is especially true for the people who are on a kind of hormonal birth control that includes a placebo or hormone-free week, which we see with the combination pill. That's the most popular one that has a placebo week. And during that week, a lot of young girls are like, oh, I'm on my period. You are not on your period. You are having withdrawal bleeding. So we can talk a little bit about what that is. So throughout the entire time that you are taking the pill, your birth control, you are putting a lot of hormones inside of you. You are putting estrogen and progestin in your body. So you're taking this pill, you're putting these hormones in your body, and then you are on your placebo week. And your placebo week is when you stop. It's sugar pill. So you stop the hormones. And this sudden drop in hormones, because you're no longer putting hormones in your body, this sudden drop is what triggers the shedding of the uterine lining. And I put that in quotations if you're watching, because it's not a real period, because you never actually ovulated. There was no ovulation that happened, and the endometrial lining that built up during this time was very minimal. So any bleeding that you're having is the shedding of a uterine lining, but there's not much to shed, because there was a very minimal buildup that's even happening. Because remember, hormonal birth control is meant to thin the uterine lining. When you have a period every single month, your uterine lining was thickening every single month, and then that thickness sheds when there's no baby. But when you're on birth control, it is thinning your uterine lining. And by thinning your uterine lining, there's really not much to shed, which is why a lot of people get thrown birth control at them, because they're like, oh, this is going to make your periods less painful and lighter. And it does this because it's quite literally thinning your uterine lining, and there's really nothing to shed. So it's altering like the actual mechanism of your body. So that is just really important to remember. And you can, if you are someone who you don't want to have withdrawal bleeding, and you just want to avoid that, and you want to have a method that's continuous, you can do that with the patch or the ring. You can skip withdrawal bleeding, and you don't have to have withdrawal bleeding. In fact, withdrawal bleeding is very medically unnecessary. And I want to give you guys a little background on how withdrawal bleeding even came to be, because you guys might be hearing this and you're like, okay, so I go on the sugar pill and then I basically fake a period, but for what? What's the point of it? And it's not medically necessary. So then why? Well, when the birth control pill was being first developed in the 1950s, the creators Dr. John Rock and Dr. Gregory Pincus were working in a time when contraception was still heavily stigmatized and in many places outright illegal. And to get the pill approved and accepted, especially by the Catholic Church, which Dr. Rock was a part of, they needed it to appear as natural as possible. So they designed it to mimic a normal menstrual cycle. And the way that you mimic a normal menstrual cycle was having a little time period that you're bleeding. And so they decided to have a placebo week or a sugar pill week where you are basically mimicking a period, but you're not actually having a period. And that's because withdrawal bleeding is happening during the placebo week, which is the hormone-free week. And it's not a real period because you have not ovulated. Without ovulation, you aren't having a regular, real period. But it was included to make women feel more normal and to signal that they weren't pregnant. So this made the pill psychologically and socially easier to accept for users. And also it did, despite the fact that it's not medically necessary, it did help the pill get past regulators and get it approved. Unfortunately, like it took faking it till you make it, honestly. So it was a strategic move to make the pill seem like it was just syncing with a woman's natural rhythm. It genuinely fake it till you make it with hormonal birth control is the truth. They quite literally were faking it so that they could get this pass, and they made it seem like it was syncing with a woman's natural cycle and saying like, oh yeah, it just like works in lieu with the period, but it's not. In reality, it's completely overriding the natural cycle. So no, it's not medically required. It's not medically necessary to have withdrawal bleeding. It's widely recognized and used. So Nexplanon, the Depo-Provera, like a lot of newer hormonal birth controls do not have a placebo week because it's not necessary. The whole point and why the placebo week was made, or the sugar pill and that whole thing, the only reason it exists is because doctors wanted it to be accepted by society and by regulators in the medical community and in the government. That was the only way that they could get it passed, is by fooling them, essentially. So, but it is true that when you are on the sugar pill and you are bleeding, you're not having a period. So that placebo week, that sugar pill week, that hormone-free week is not a true period. It is known as withdrawal bleeding. So then we have non-hormonal options, because some people want those options as well. There's the copper IUD like Paragard, and it releases copper ions that are toxic to sperm. So it kind of acts as a spermicide, but it also can increase bleeding and cramping in this case. There's also barrier methods like condoms, diaphragms, cervical caps, and they all physically block sperm from swimming. They just like trap it. There's also fertility awareness methods, FAM, and that's what we talked about, tracking your body temperature, knowing when you ovulate and stuff like that. It involves tracking your cycle and avoiding intercourse during your fertile window. And then there's also sterilization, and sterilization could be tubal ligation for women, and there's also vasectomies for men. So these are great options for people who don't want to use hormones. There's many different options, as we just talked about. So hormonal birth control isn't always the answer if you're trying to prevent pregnancy. There are other options, and it's about knowing what works for you, what's going to be best for you, and again, making informed decisions. So we do need to talk about the side effects of hormonal birth control, because birth control doesn't just affect the reproductive system. It can impact your mood due to hormonal shifts or neurotransmitters. It can affect your libido. Some people report lower sex drive because of hormonal birth control, because you're not just affecting estrogen and progestin. Your hormones, your entire endocrine system is literally a system. They all work together. And if you affect one or two hormones, you're affecting all the other hormones. You're affecting testosterone. You're affecting androgens. You are affecting cortisol. You're affecting your melatonin. You are affecting so many different hormones when you're on hormonal birth control. So this can affect your libido. This can affect your skin. Progestin types can help worsen or help with acne depending on androgen activity. So depending on your androgens, your testosterone, it can either help or make it worse. It can actually affect weight and appetite for many people, but it varies widely from person to person. It can affect the gut microbiome because hormones can alter gut flora, which in turn affects mood and metabolism and immune health. And it can affect the vaginal microbiome because it can affect estrogen. And we know that estrogen is super important for good bacteria in the vagina. So women's side effects are often dismissed in clinical settings when we're talking about hormonal birth control. And I just want to call out the lack of research that exists on female bodies and hormone interactions. There's not enough research that identifies what the side effects are. That is why when you get on birth control, you literally will have the biggest piece of paper in there that literally lists out hundreds of different symptoms that you can have, because there's just a lack of research with how our body will react to hormonal birth control. So it's not for everyone. But again, being informed and knowing this, knowing that you could experience weight loss, you could experience a change in your appetite, you can experience weight gain, you can experience hair loss, you can experience so many different side effects, but you have to know that going into saying yes and agreeing and making that decision. You have to know that. So I think it's just really important to understanding that. And it's really important to not shame hormonal birth control, because I know when we talk about all the possible like side effects and things like that, it can make people say like, what the hell's the point of birth control then? Why are we even supporting it? What's the point of taking it? It's because there are special cases for it. There's some people who have PCOS, and birth control can regulate their cycles and it can reduce androgen symptoms. So people with PCOS typically have high androgen activity and low estrogen. So if you're pumping in synthetic estrogen into your body, this can suppress androgens. So it can help people get their cycle back and help regulate their cycle. But we know it doesn't treat the root cause, but it can be helpful for some people. It can also be helpful with people who have PMDD. It can be managed with hormonal suppression or antidepressants, and it depends on individual response. And it can be helpful for some people with endometriosis because continuous use can reduce the flare-ups and bleeding, but it won't eliminate lesions. It can also really help people with adenomyosis who have a thickened uterine lining that grows into the myometrium. Adenomyosis is incredibly understudied and not talked about enough. So hormonal birth control can help for people with adenomyosis. So birth control is often handed out as a Band-Aid. I will say it doesn't get to the root cause of many different conditions. However, I think this is the time to not demonize birth control, but advocate for deeper investigations when hormonal imbalances are the root cause, because birth control can be helpful if we are testing different. All of these conditions are different for many different women. Like the way that it affects women is different for everyone. So I always advocate, like, let's test these women. Let's get an endocrine panel done and let's see, what is your estrogen at? What is your testosterone at? What are your hormonal levels at? And then we can cater and tailor hormonal therapies based on your hormonal results. So it's really important to know what your hormones are at, what's going on with your hormones, identifying that, and that in turn can help give a big picture and help with treating. So this isn't about demonizing birth control, because I demonize and hate the way that it's used currently, because it's just thrown at people and it's a Band-Aid for many. It literally just throws birth control at them to just prevent pregnancy or to just fix PCOS. And that's not always the case, but it doesn't mean that birth control is bad, because it has helped so many women, hormonal birth control. So, and I hate calling it hormonal birth control, because it's not just like birth control. It's hormonal therapy, and it can be helpful for so many people with different conditions. So it's just important to bring that up and know that, because ultimately understanding how your cycle works and how birth control interacts with it is life-changing. And this isn't about pushing just one method. It's about equipping you with the science and the confidence to make informed decisions about your health, your hormones, and your future. So my closing thought on the whole conversation of birth control is that choice is equivalent to power. And in order to have that power and have that choice, you have to have information. And that's why I do what I do. That's why I make my educational content. That's why I wanted to make this episode, so that I can give you the information about birth control, hormonal birth control, non-hormonal birth control, your natural cycle, so that you can understand what's happening in your body. If you don't take birth control, you now can understand your natural cycle very deeply. If you are on birth control and you're like, wait, I have the IUD, I have Kyleena in. Hopefully this episode explained to you what Kyleena is doing, what the combination pill is doing, what the mini pill is doing, what your natural body is doing. Like, now you have a full big picture and understanding of what's going on. So you might consider switching after this. You might say, oh, I want to take this instead of this. If you are on the pill, you might say, oh, well, I don't really need withdrawal bleeding. I want to do Nexplanon. Or if you're on Nexplanon, you're like, I don't want to suppress ovulation. I want to get off of it. I want to do. Now you have a big picture. You understand what's happening with your body. So I just feel like this is a very valuable, resourceful, and useful episode. So I really hope that you guys enjoyed it. I hope that you guys loved it. And I hope that it left you feeling empowered and strong and confident in whatever decision that you make. So I'd love to chat with you guys in the comments and see what your thoughts are on all of this. I love you guys so much, and I cannot wait to see you in the next episode. Take care, guys. Bye.